was just a lock, a simple, hardened steel lock on my storage unit. But when I saw it lying on the ground, severed clean in two, a cold dread washed over me. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a message. The HOA board president, Linda, had been threatening me for weeks over my Project Jeep. She called it an eyesore, a violation. But this was a direct declaration of war. She had crossed a line, violating my property, thinking her petty rules gave her all the power. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't have possibly known, was that her power play was about to trigger a chain of events so catastrophic for her that it would unravel her entire world. Because that Jeep, it wasn't really mine, and the people it did belong to, they don't take kindly to theft. My name is Alex, and for my wife, Sarah, and me, moving into the Willow Creek Estates was supposed to be our fresh start. After years of saving, we finally had our own slice of the American dream. A modest two-story with a small garage, perfect for our new life. The community was pristine, with manicured lawns and quiet, winding streets. It felt safe, peaceful, perfect. That peace, we'd soon learn, came with a price enforced by the HOA board president, a woman named Linda. From our first week, her presence was noticeable. She was the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's perfection, often seen patrolling the sidewalks with a critical eye, measuring grass blades with a ruler, or noting a misplaced trash can lid with a disapproving click of her tongue. She lived for the bylaws, a thick binder she reportedly carried in her car at all times. I'm a mechanic by trade. My garage isn't just a place to park a car. It's my workshop, my sanctuary. My latest project was a beat-up old Jeep Wrangler I'd bought at auction for a steal. It was my winter project, a chance to restore something with my own hands. I knew the HOA had rules about unsightly vehicles, so I was careful. I kept it parked in my driveway, always covered with a fitted gray tarp to keep it out of sight and protected from the elements. I made sure it was clean with no leaks. I followed the letter of the law. For Linda, the law was whatever she decided it was. The first notice arrived like a shot across the bow. It was slipped into our mailbox, a crisp, formal letter citing violation 12C, storage of inoperable or unregistered vehicles on the property. The Jeep was registered. It was operable. I'd even started it that weekend. I tried to be reasonable. I went to the HOA office, registration in hand, to explain it was a project car, under a cover, and completely within my rights. Linda listened with a thin, impatient smile. She didn't care about the registration. She called the tarp visual pollution, and the Jeep itself a community eyesore that devalues every home on this street. Her words weren't about rules. They were about control. She gave me an ultimatum. Remove the blight within 72 hours or face escalating fines and further action. I left that meeting with a knot of frustration in my stomach. This wasn't about a Jeep. This was about a woman who couldn't stand not having the final say. I moved the Jeep off my driveway, thinking I'd found a solution that would finally get her off my back. I rented a small private storage unit at the facility just half a mile outside our neighborhood gates. It was clean, secure, and most importantly, far from Linda's jurisdiction. Or so I thought. Moving the Jeep to the storage unit felt like a victory. A small, expensive one, but a victory nonetheless. For about 2 weeks, the letter stopped. The silence from the HOA was a sweet relief. Sarah and I started to relax, believing we'd finally navigated around Linda's obsession. We'd played by her ridiculous rules, even when they cost us money, and we could finally get on with our lives. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning. Another official HOA envelope, thicker this time, was waiting in our mailbox. My heart sank. I tore it open right there on the driveway. It wasn't a fine for the Jeep. It was a fine for the storage unit itself. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic malice. It cited an obscure buried bylaws amendment I'd never heard of, Covenant 27G, which prohibited residents from leasing any off-site storage facility visible from any common area without prior written HOA approval. The unit was half a mile away, but because you could technically see its outer wall from the community's eastern entrance gate, it was suddenly a violation. The fine was $500. The sheer pettiness of it took my breath away. She hadn't just moved the goalposts, she'd invented a whole new game on a field I didn't even know existed. This was no longer about a car. This was a crusade. I went back to the HOA office, this time with a lawyer friend on speakerphone. Linda sat calmly behind her desk, a portrait of smug authority. She listened to our arguments about the absurdity of the rule, its selective enforcement, I was the only one being targeted, and its clear purpose as harassment. Her response was chillingly simple. She slid a copy of the signed community bylaws across the desk, my signature on the page from when we closed on the house. You agreed to these rules, Mr. Evans. All of them. Approval was not granted. Pay the fine or it will be levied against your property with interest. We were trapped. We paid the fine. It felt like drinking poison. We were paying for the privilege of being harassed. The following month, the harassment evolved. It became more personal, more invasive. We received a violation for our grass being a quarter-inch too long, the same day I had mowed it. Another for a non-approved welcome mat Sarah had bought. Our trash can was cited for being at the curb 6 minutes past the 7 a.m. retrieval time, a rule nobody else followed. Each citation was a small cut, a constant drip of anxiety and anger. We started feeling like prisoners in our own home, nervously glancing out the window, waiting for Linda's white Lexus to cruise slowly past our house. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I drove to the storage facility to check on the Jeep and maybe work on the engine for a few hours to de-stress. As I turned down the row of units, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A bright orange sticker was slapped across the latch of my unit door. It read, "Notice of impoundment. Vehicle deemed abandoned. For immediate tow." My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys. The lock was still there. They hadn't cut it yet. This was just a warning. A threat. I stormed into the facility manager's office. The guy, Dave, looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, man," he said, holding up a copy of my HOA's violation letter. "A woman from your homeowners association came by. She was very persuasive. She said this was an unauthorized vehicle creating a liability for them, and that if we didn't comply with the impound notice, they'd sue us and all our clients for zoning violations. She made it sound like we were harboring a public nuisance." Linda had stretched her authority beyond the neighborhood gates. She was now poisoning my relationships with outside businesses, strong-arming them with legal threats. She was a ghost, haunting every aspect of my life. The only thing I could think of. I called my cousin, Mark. Mark isn't just family. He's a sergeant with the county police department. I was furious explaining the situation, my voice cracking with frustration. "She's going to have it towed, Mark. She's literally trying to steal my property over a flower pot rule." Mark listened patiently, then let out a low whistle. "Whoa, okay. She's playing a dangerous game. Look, legally, if she cuts that lock, that's criminal trespass and possibly theft, but you need to cover yourself. Get a better lock, something serious, a hardened steel shackle lock. Film everything, document every interaction, and send me a copy of the registration just in case." Then he paused and a sly tone entered his voice. "Actually, about that Jeep, don't move it. Leave it right there." I was confused. "What? Why? She's going to take it." "Trust me," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Just make sure the registration is absolutely current and in the glove box. Do not move that vehicle. Let her make her move. It was a terrifying leap of faith. I was being told to stand still while a tsunami was coming right at me. But I trusted Mark. I bought the toughest lock I could find, a monstrous thing that would take industrial tools to break. I mounted a small, discreet wireless camera inside the storage unit, pointed at the door. I updated the registration and placed it neatly in the glove box. Every day was agony, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The tension was unbearable. Every phone call, every knock on the door, every time I drove to the unit, I expected to find it empty. We were living on a tripwire. Then, one Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an alert from the motion-activated camera inside the storage unit. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the live feed. And what I saw made the world shrink to the size of my phone screen. There was Linda, dressed not in her usual power suit, but in jeans and a sweatshirt, as if dressed for dirty work. She wasn't alone. Next to her was a hulking man in a tow truck company jacket, and in his hands were a pair of massive, industrial-grade bolt cutters. He raised them to my new hardened steel lock. Linda stood there, arms crossed, a look of triumphant vindication on her face. She was actually smiling. She gave a single sharp nod. The screen didn't have sound, but in my head I heard the deafening metallic snap as the lock was severed. The door to my storage unit began to roll open. They were inside. They were taking the Jeep. They were actually doing it. And all I could do was watch, helpless, from half a mile away, as my cousin's mysterious plan snapped into terrifying, irreversible motion. The world stopped. On my phone screen, the grainy live feed showed the storage unit door rolling all the way up. The tow truck driver stepped inside, filling the frame for a moment before moving to hook up the Jeep. And there was Linda, standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, her hands on her hips like a conquering general surveying a captured fortress. That look of pure, unadulterated triumph on her face, it was the single most infuriating thing I have ever seen. A cold, focused rage washed over me, burning away the panic. This was no longer just about a car. This was breaking. This was theft. And I had it all on camera. My fingers flew across my phone screen. I didn't call 911. I called my cousin, Mark, and put it on speaker as I threw my car into gear, screeching out of my driveway. "Mark, it's happening right now. She's at the unit with a tow truck driver. They cut the lock." Mark's voice was instantly all business, sharp and calm. "I'm looking at the feed right now. I'm dispatching a unit to your location. Do not engage them, Alex. I mean it. Pull over nearby. Film everything from a distance, but do not get in their way. Let them hook it up. Let them think they've won. Let them take it," I yelled, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Let them commit the entire crime," he corrected, his voice icy. "Just get there and be a witness." I arrived within 2 minutes, pulling my car into the lot of a closed-down car wash across the street. My hands were shaking. Through my windshield, I had a perfect view. The Jeep was already on the flatbed. The driver was securing the tires with straps. Linda was standing to the side, now holding her phone, probably taking pictures of her victory to present at the next HOA meeting. Then, she did something else. As the driver finished, she walked over to the passenger side of the tow truck's cab, opened the door, and climbed in. She was going to ride along. She wanted to see this through to the very end, to personally deliver my property to the impound lot. The audacity was staggering. That's when I saw the first patrol car. It didn't have its lights or siren on. It just turned into the storage facility entrance and rolled to a stop, positioning itself casually behind the tow truck, blocking its exit. Another cruiser did the same, pulling in front of it. The tow truck driver froze, a strap still in his hand. The cab door opened and Linda stepped out, a look of confused irritation on her face. She marched toward the first patrol car, already pulling her HOA president persona around her like a cloak. This was it. I got out of my car, phone raised, recording everything. I was too far away to hear the first words, but I could see the body language. Linda was gesturing animatedly, pointing at the Jeep on the truck, then pointing back toward the Willow Creek Estates. I could imagine what she was saying. I'm the HOA president. This is an abandoned vehicle, a violation. We have the authority. The police officer, a young woman, listened patiently. Then she held up a hand, stopping Linda's flow of words. She pointed at the Jeep. She said something. Linda's confident posture faltered for a split second. She shook her head, her gestures becoming more frantic. That's when I started walking across the street. Mark's advice be damned. This was my moment. As I got closer, snippets of the conversation cut through the air. Unauthorized tow. Private property, the officer was saying. Officer, this is a mistake, Linda insisted, her voice sharp and condescending. This vehicle is the subject of numerous community bylaws violations. I have the paperwork right here. We are well within our rights to impound it from this location. Ma'am, the officer said, her voice firm and loud enough for me to hear clearly now. This storage facility is outside your HOA's jurisdiction. You have no authority here. More importantly, this vehicle is not his to impound. Linda blinked, thrown. Not his. What are you talking about? Of course it's his. Alex Evans, he's right there. She pointed an accusatory finger at me as I approached. The police officer didn't even look at me. She kept her eyes locked on Linda. The registration and VIN identify this as an asset of the county sheriff's department, the officer stated, her voice flat and official. It's part of an ongoing undercover operations task force. The words hung in the air. Linda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face. The smug, triumphant expression melted away, replaced by a slow-dawning, horrific realization. She looked from the officer to the beat-up Jeep on the truck, to me. Her brain was trying to connect the dots, and the picture it was forming was her ruin. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. It's a junker. It's his project. The project, ma'am, a new voice boomed, was our low-profile surveillance vehicle for a long-term narcotics operation, and UJA, project, ma'am, a new voice boomed, was our low-profile surveillance vehicle for a long-term narcotics operation, and you just compromised it. Another car had pulled up, an unmarked sedan. Out stepped my cousin, Mark, but he wasn't my cousin right then. He was Sergeant Miller in full uniform, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked right up to Linda, who seemed to shrink with every step he took. You accessed a secured law enforcement asset, Mark said, his voice low and dangerous. You willfully destroyed a lock on a private storage unit. You conspired to tow it away. We have you on camera authorizing the entire act. That's trespassing, criminal mischief, vandalism, and the unlawful conversion of property. But most importantly, you have potentially jeopardized an active investigation and endangered the lives of officers. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? Linda was as white as a ghost. She was trembling. The HOA binder, the rules, the fines, they were all worthless trinkets in the face of this. Her petty kingdom had just been dissolved by the real world. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not frustration, not anger, pure, unadulterated terror. Another officer stepped forward. Linda Schaefer, you have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights began to echo in the quiet storage lot, against the backdrop of the very Jeep she'd tried to destroy, I finally understood Mark's plan. He hadn't just wanted to stop her. He wanted to let her hang herself with the very rope of authority she'd been so desperately tugging on. And as the cold, metallic click of the handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, the sound was more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. The HOA president, the ruler of Willow Creek Estates, was being placed in the back of a police car. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of the end. because the fallout from her power trip was about to rain down on every single aspect of the life she had so carefully built. The sight of Linda being guided into the back of the patrol car, her head ducked low to avoid the camera I still had pointed at her, was something I will never forget. It wasn't a moment of gloating for me. It was a surreal, quiet vindication. The shrill whistle of her authority had been silenced by the definitive slam of a car door. The tow truck driver, pale and frantic, was being questioned by another officer, desperately showing the paperwork Linda had given him and explaining that she had assured him it was all legal. The Jeep was carefully unloaded and pushed back into the storage unit. An officer placed a new official sheriff's department seal on the door until a reinforced lock could be installed. The mundane storage unit had become a crime scene. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. Linda was charged with a slew of offenses: criminal trespass, vandalism, destruction of property, and the unlawful conversion of a vehicle. The most serious charge, however, was the interference with a law enforcement operation. That was a felony. Her reign of terror ended not with a fine or a hearing, but with a perp walk and a booking photo. The news, as you can imagine, spread through Willow Creek Estates like a wildfire. The HOA board, which had previously been a silent entity that enabled her, went into immediate and total damage control. An emergency meeting was called, one we were all invited to. The room was packed, buzzing with a nervous energy. The remaining board members, looking pale and shaken, didn't even sit at the head table. They stood before the community and offered a series of apologies that was staggering. They spoke of a grave misuse of power, a failure of oversight, and a commitment to total reform. They announced Linda's immediate removal as president and from the board entirely. Then came the votes, swift and unanimous. Covenant 27G, the absurd rule about off-site storage, was repealed immediately. The fines levied against me, and against several other families who had been silently suffering under Linda's selective enforcement, were rescinded and refunded. A new committee was formed to review and simplify the entire bylaws document, with a focus on common sense and homeowner privacy. For the first time since we moved in, the HOA felt less like a governing body and more like what it was supposed to be, a collective of neighbors. But the consequences for Linda extended far beyond the HOA. The felony charge hung over her head. Facing the very real possibility of prison time, her lawyer brokered a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charges, and the felony was reduced to a misdemeanor with a massive condition. She had to resign from all community positions permanently and sell her home within 90 days. She was, effectively, exiled from the kingdom she had worked so hard to control. The day her moving truck pulled away was a quiet, symbolic end to the conflict. The neighborhood didn't throw a party. There was just a collective, palpable sigh of relief. The air itself felt lighter. As for the Jeep, Mark and the task force decided the cover was permanently blown. The department sold it to me for $1, a token payment required by law. I finally finished restoring it, and now it sits in my driveway without a tarp, in full view of everyone. A permanent monument to the day pettiness met principle. This story isn't really about a Jeep, though, and it's not just about a crazy HOA Karen. It's about a much bigger idea. It's about the nature of power. How even the smallest amount of it, placed in the wrong hands, can corrupt absolutely. Linda wasn't the dictator of a country. She was the president of a homeowners association. But she wielded her little gavel like it was a scepter, and she used the rule book not to protect the community, but to feed her own need for control. So what's the takeaway? What's the point of all this? The lesson is that you never have to lie down and take it. Bullies, whether on a playground or in an HOA boardroom, rely on one thing: your compliance. They bank on you being too tired, too poor, or too afraid to fight back. They hide behind bureaucracy and fine print, hoping you'll just get frustrated and give up. But you have rights. Document everything. Read your bylaws. Know the actual law, which almost always supersedes HOA rules. Talk to your neighbors. You are almost certainly not alone. And when someone tells you just to pay the fine to make it go away, remember that you're not just paying money. You're funding their tyranny. You're paying for the rope they'll eventually use to hang you. Our home is our castle. It's our sanctuary. And no one, not a noisy neighbor, not a busybody HOA board, has the right to steal your peace. What Linda did was wrong, but what we did was simple. We held up a mirror. We showed her the true cost of her actions, and in the end, the weight of that reflection crushed her. So what do you think? Have you ever faced someone who let a tiny bit of power go to their head? What would you have done if it were you? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.